This podcast is brought to you by Cintas, helping keep your automotive business looking great from showroom to service bay, with essentials like durable workwear, absorbent shop towels, and high-performance floor mats. Get ready for the workday at cintas.com/automotive.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Wednesday, April 1st, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in New York City. Today on the show, Mercedes invests $4 billion into an Alabama plant to relieve tariff pressures. Hyundai and Kia post record U.S. sales in the first quarter, and a federal judge rules that a California lawsuit against Scout Motors' direct sales may proceed. Plus, Molly Boygan, Automotive News Tech and Innovation reporter, joins us to talk about the 6 years of crises the auto industry has faced and how automakers are responding.
There's only so many things that the auto industry can absorb before it has to pass some of that pressure on to consumers.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Mercedes-Benz plans to invest $4 billion into its Alabama factory by 2030. The bulk of the spending will be to localize production of the GLC crossover, a high-volume U.S. nameplate. Mercedes sold about 72,000 GLCs in the U.S. last year. That's about a quarter of the brand's U.S. volume, excluding vans. Many automakers have shifted towards U.S. production as a result of the Trump administration's tariffs on imported vehicles and parts. Mercedes currently faces a 15% tariff on every GLC it ships to the U.S. Hyundai and Kia posted record first quarter sales, despite a weak March. The brands posted lower U.S. sales on mixed electric vehicle and crossover volume. But first quarter sales rose 1% at Hyundai and over 4% at Kia. Hyundai said it set a March record for hybrid deliveries, driven by gains for the Sonata, Elantra, and Santa Fe. Kia said first quarter sales of hybrid models rose 73%, and sales of overall models increased 30%. This is the sixth consecutive quarter that U.S. sales at Kia have grown. And a judge ruled that the California New Car Dealers Association's lawsuit against Scout Motors and Volkswagen will continue. The lawsuit alleges that Scout's direct-to-consumer sales model violates a state law. The judge denied Volkswagen's motions to dismiss, asserting that the California New Car Dealers Association properly alleged that Scout is Volkswagen's affiliate. If courts consider Scout to be Volkswagen's affiliate, it is subject to a California law that states affiliated brands must use franchise dealers to sell and service vehicles. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Yesterday, Volkswagen debuted the 2027 Atlas ahead of the New York Auto Show. The redesigned Atlas gains a premium feel with sharper styling. I'm here with Jack Walsworth, who was at the reveal yesterday. Jack, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Hey, Kel, good to be here.
So, Jack, what's changed about the Atlas in the redesign?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the interior. It's a lot more nicer looking, to put it simply. If you've seen the inside of a redesigned Tiguan, those launched last year, it looks very familiar. The dash design is a big piece of flowing wood that goes across. The higher trims have like these really cool details on the side panels. It's backlit, so you can see lights on the door, which is nice. All about the base trim, get a 15-inch infotainment screen. So basically, think of like a laptop at the center of the dashboard, which is a lot snappier, quicker to respond. One common complaint with previous infotainments on Volkswagens is that they're kind of laggy and buggy. This should alleviate that. It still looks like an Atlas. I've heard a couple people say that, or some dealers say it looks more like a refresh than a redesign. But, I think to Volkswagen's credit, that design, has definitely worked. But also, to be fair, it is all new sheet metal, all that stuff. It's only about an inch longer, so dimensionally it looks the same. But, it definitely seems like Volkswagen really emphasize the creature comforts. You can get available massage seats if you want. And this is, not just a Volkswagen, but it's not like it's an Audi or Bentley or anything like that. So it definitely seems like Volkswagen's making a lot more, nicer options available to customers that want those. But, generally speaking, it definitely kind of stays true to the Atlas formula. It's the first redesign for the model. And, the Atlas was really intended for the U.S. market back when it launched in 2017. So, I think Volkswagen didn't want to rock the boat too much with the redesign.
Now, speaking of the U.S. market, how is the Atlas specifically targeting U.S. shoppers?
So it's big, it's 3 rows. Even the third row is decent space yesterday. I ventured to the back, and while I wouldn't want to be there all the time, I did fit. A lot of room for luggage, gear. It's got 7 USB ports. It's really emphasized on the interior experience. And, us Americans love our big crossovers, got to have 3 rows. So it definitely aims for that. The cabin is pretty spacious. And if you pull all the seats down, you could haul a ton of stuff. And, in the presentation yesterday, Volkswagen executives really emphasized, this is for families. We want people to be able to take their kids somewhere, pick up their kids' friends. If they're going to go camping and haul a bunch of stuff, they can do that too. So, that was Volkswagen's thing before the Atlas. They had the Touareg, which, people might remember was a more premium crossover. It really didn't fit the brand that well. And it was big for Volkswagen standards, but not necessarily what American consumers were looking for. So again, the Atlas came out in 2017 and really bridged a gap in the lineup and has given dealers something to compete with the Toyota Highlanders, and now the Tellurides of the world. So, it's not huge, but it is big. And, again, it kind of fits that sweet spot of the 3-row crossover segment.
Perfect. Jack, thank you so much for joining me.
Yep, anytime.
Coming up next, Molly Boygon, Automotive News Tech and Innovation reporter, talks about the auto industry's last 6 years and the crises it's faced and how the industry is getting worn down. That's next on Daily Drive.
Are you a dealer creating a workplace culture your employees are proud to be part of? Applications are now open for the 2026 Automotive News Best Dealerships to Work For program. This isn't just an award, it's a chance to get real insight into what's working at your dealership and where you can improve. And we've expanded the categories this year, recognizing everything from technician experience and leadership development to AI enablement and employee retention. The registration deadline is April 17th. Find out more and apply at autonews.com.
Your day-to-day is hectic. Don't waste time juggling vendors. Cintas helps keep your auto shop looking great from showroom to service bay. Get durable workwear from your team's favorite brands, absorbent shop towels to tackle oil and grease, and high-performance floor mats to help keep your lobby clean. All picked up, washed, and returned back to you with no upfront cost required. Get a single source partner to keep you firing on all cylinders. Visit cintas.com/automotive to get ready for the workday.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. The auto industry has been battered by 6 years of crisis, from the pandemic to chip shortages to cyber attacks to tariffs. And now, oil prices surging past $100 a barrel are threatening to compound an already exhausted industry. Our own Molly Boygon, Automotive News Tech and Innovation reporter, has been tracking how these compounding crises are wearing down automakers and suppliers. She joined me here in New York City at the J.D. Power Forum. Molly Boygon, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me, Kel.
All right, Molly. So, interesting article we have online at autonews.com. After 6 straight years of disruption, how close is the auto industry to a true breaking point, or has it already adapted to operate in what one expert called a stabilized crisis?
The auto industry has made a lot of significant adaptations. Reshoring supply chains, diversifying supply chains, and also just kind of on a personnel level, people have become so much more resilient. What would have laid out flat employees at auto industry companies 5 years ago is now just sort of a daily vitamin, if you will. So I think that the auto industry has adapted. In terms of the breaking point, I think you start to get into the confluence of so many factors that are putting price pressure on the industry. Additional tariffs, losses from electric vehicles, the rising price of fuel. And I do think that there's only so many things that the auto industry can absorb before it has to pass some of that pressure on to consumers. And then there are so many sort of cascading effects from those rising prices. And that's, I think, where you start to get into, is this a serious threat to profitability for the automakers?
Well, you bring up oil and gas, and how significant is the latest oil shock compared to previous disruptions like the chip shortages or tariffs? And where do you expect the biggest impact to show up first?
So it's a really interesting question because consumers are able to basically pay for additional fuel costs. I read that it starts to affect their purchasing decisions when fuel becomes around 5% of their income. So we're not there yet. It's around 2-3%. However, oil is the bedrock of basically every manufacturing sector in the entire world. So even though the U.S. produces its own oil, there are other parts of the country that rely on oil to produce everything from chemicals to plastics to everything. I mean, it is the literal fuel that funds the global economy. So it's not as acutely targeted for the auto industry as something like a semiconductor shortage or a chip shortage, but it touches so many parts of the sector that I think it's sort of like a breadth versus depth issue. I mean, I think the question that everyone's asking is, how much longer is this going to go on?
Right. Now, automakers have diversified supply chains and reshored some production, as you said, but this article suggests there's still only so much companies can prepare for. Now, what are the biggest remaining vulnerabilities?
Companies can only prepare for so much, in part because the development timelines for the auto industry are so long. And this has been a sort of challenge for the industry through all of these different crises, through COVID, through the tariffs, through different parts shortages. So I think that that's probably the next frontier and something that the auto industry is already talking about in other areas, for example, to compete with China. We have these development timelines that are so long that they sort of hamstring the industry's ability to adapt. And if developers and other people that work at auto industry companies, designers, product people are able to accelerate the development timelines, then it will allow continued adaptation for all of these shocks. I still don't think that the industry is ever going to be like a consumer electronics segment where the reaction time is so fast, but that's something that someone that actually Richard Truitt spoke to for the story he contributed reporting said, Kia, for example, is not looking at what are we going to change 5 years from now based on the current tariff burden. They're looking at, assuming that the current tariff burden continues, what can we do 6 months, a year from now? So just kind of trying to balance that timing and consistency and adaptability, I think is the real challenge.
Now, with gas prices rising and EV incentives disappearing, now how do these competing forces reshape the industry's long-term strategy around electrification?
This is the $1 million question.
It is.
It is. And actually, this came up on stage at the J.D. Power Auto Forum in New York City. Somebody asked Patrick Manzi, who's the chief economist for NADA, isn't it ironic that just as all of the automakers are pulling back on their EV plans, gas prices are spiking, oil is above $100 a barrel for only the fourth time ever in history. And he said, yes, of course it's ironic. So I think, again, it's a question of longevity. How much longer does the war go on? How much longer is the supply of oil constrained? And really at what point do consumers feel the cost pressure so acutely that it changes their buying decisions? This was something else that came up at the Auto Forum. So in March of 2022, fuel as a percent of the overall cost of a car payment was 31%. Right now, it's at 23%, which is a slight increase from last month, which was 17%, but we're still nowhere near that sort of March 2022 relative high, which again, oil and gas prices have remained relatively low over the last few years. So that was a spike tied to the Ukraine conflict. So anyway, we still have a little bit to go, I think, before consumers start to really make new decisions and reconsider purchases because of the cost of fuel.
Now, here's the part and the question that consumers want to know. At what point do cumulative cost pressures from oil, tariffs, and materials start to meaningfully hit consumers and demand?
I think that this is an interesting one because the auto industry is so segmented. None of the automakers are going to really stick their neck out and make significant changes to prices if they're looking around at the rest of the segment and their peers are not doing the same thing. So I really wonder who's going to be basically the first to blink. It's kind of like a staring contest between all the different manufacturers. And then once that happens, I think it'll be like, a flood of changes. Right now, the costs have remained relatively steady for consumers. And once one automaker folds, I think the rest are soon to follow.
Molly Boygon, always insightful. Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me, Kel.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Riley Hodder, Molly Boygon, Jack Walsworth, Urvash Kakaria, and David Phillips for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on first quarter outcomes, U.S. production investments, Scout Motors direct sales, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for an interview with Doug Bolduc, managing editor of Automotive News Europe, on what the European auto crisis might mean for the U.S.
You hear mostly about the German companies simply because they have such a dominant role, and they made a lot of very big moves and big bets as we started to see the world through very electrification-driven eyes.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.